Is okay? No? Hello, everybody. First, I wish to thank the organizer of the seminar series, Dr. Alessandro Piccolo, for his kind invitation. The idea of starting an exchange of ideas between economists and historians of antiquity has already been fruitful to me. I looked into some recent articles of Professor Sergio Cerrato, dealing with Karl Polanyi and NIE and Greco-Roman economics and the surplus approach. I don't want to claim that I have already understood everything, but I'm going to work with the idea of surplus trading at one point in my presentation. I'm terribly sorry to admit that only today I became familiar with the arguments of Professor Riccardo Pariboni, who very kindly introduced himself via email some weeks ago. Before I start my paper, a first disclaimer, I shall only talk about Greek trade, not Roman, because I do not feel competent enough. Okay, now I have to see whether I can. Okay, next slide. So this is the content or what I'm talking about. It's in three parts. I think I should give you a short introduction to the battlefield of ancient Greek economic history. And then I will be talking about the conditions of trade in the Mediterranean, so triggering the trade. And the third point is institutions, or I talk about some, only very few institutions triggering exchange and trade. So guest friendship, surplus trading, and port of trade. It all started in Germany, I think. Everywhere it started in Germany. So with the Bücher-Meyer controversy. The economist Karl Bücher was not the only one to build a concept of developmental stages in this time, 19th century. These stages were thought to build the history of mankind, how it would have progressed. Bücher's stages of economic development are as follows: closed household economy for antiquity, the city economy for the Middle Ages, and the national economy for the modern era. These abstract schemes could not stand up for closer or too closer examination. Especially for antiquity, the first stage was soon called into question. The ancient historian and Egyptologist Eduard Meyer, and he was mentioned already last seminar by Juan Carlos, wanted to write a more realistic and more modern history of the Greek economy. Just as the contemporary German preoccupation at this time with the problem of national unity distorted the view of political history, the picture the German classicist made of Greek economic history reflected the development of modern Europe. They applied the concepts and terminology of contemporary economic history more or less literally to the Greek world. According to them, from the beginning, the Greek world witnessed a considerable development of industry and commerce, an expansion of production and exchange of a capitalist nature, and the development of a monetary economy. Moneyed aristocracies replaced the old landed aristocracies. The landowners gave way to industrialists and traders. Greek states were supposed to consider commerce as the basis for the political decisions in a very modern kind. So, and then one can say that Eduard Meyer maintained is a quote I put on the slide: the 7th and 6th centuries in Greek history corresponded to the 14th and 15th centuries in the modern world, the 5th century to the 16th. So you see what is modernism, yeah? To ask whether Greek economy was modern or primitive was clearly a false start. There, in this discussion, was no question whether it was possible to study the Greek economy in isolation and using the concepts designed for the modern world. The German sociologist Max Weber rejected the false alternative, modernism or primitivism. He defined the ancient Greek city as opposed to the medieval city. The Greek city was an aristocracy of warriors or even sailors, and a city of consumers, whereas the medieval city was a city of producers. This is, in fact, um, it was Bücher who claimed the idea of the consumer city first, and Max Weber only followed him. And this was recently emphasized by a colleague of mine, Beate Wagner-Hasel. Max Weber's ideas were taken up by the ancient historian Johannes Hasebröck. Hasebröck emphasized the links between economy and the political life of the polis. According to him, there could be no question of economic policy in the modern sense in the Greek cities, because there was to him, no national commerce or industry in them. Um, he thought that it was more the non-citizens, the outsiders, whether free or unfree, who were involved in the economy of the city. And by definition, these had no access to political power, the outsiders or non-citizens. The citizens reserved for themselves a monopoly of land ownership, whereby the other economic activities such as commerce, manufacture, etc., were left to outsiders. As far as Greek city-states showed any interest in economic problems, they sought only to secure imports of materials and commodities essential for the life of the city. Citizens mattered only as consumers, not as producers. The city-state was concerned with its revenues, and these were catered for by means of custom duties or harbor taxes, or through war and foreign domination in various forms. The contribution of both Weber and Hasebröck was to consider the relationship between economy and the institutions of the Greek city. Thus, there cannot be a valid study of Greek economy outside the framework of the Greek city. This takes us to Karl Polanyi, who was no specialist in ancient history, but an economist and anthropologist from Hungary, going to Vienna and in 1933 to Great Britain and then in 1940 to the USA. Polanyi identified two meanings of economic. The formal meaning refers to the economics as the logic of rational action and decision making, as a rational choice between the alternatives used of limited or scarce means. The second, the substantive meaning, however, presupposes neither rational decision making nor conditions of scarcity. It simply refers to the study of how humans make a living from their social and natural environment. He drew a clear distinction between modern societies, where the economy has become liberated and disembedded, and then it has become a sector of its own and can therefore be studied in isolation. In what Polanyi called primitive, or at this time, primitive or archaic societies, the economy is always more or less embedded in society and its institutions. To study the place of the economy in such a society, one cannot use the concepts and terminology of modern economies, because they only apply to the world in which they were created. With Polanyi, the debate changed from the dichotomy between primitivists and modernists to that between substantivists and formalists. And last but not least, I would like to mention Moses I. Finlay, who attended Polanyi's seminars in New York before leaving the US for Cambridge in Britain. He was dismissed from Rutgers University for refusing to answer a question about whether he was a member of the Communist Party. He taught ancient social and economic history at Cambridge, eventually becoming Master of Darwin College. His most notable publication is The Ancient Economy of 1973. Following the example of Karl Polanyi, Finlay argued that the ancient economy should not be analyzed using the concepts of modern economic science, because ancient men had no notion of the economy as a separate part of society. And because economic actions in antiquity were determined not primarily by economic but by social concerns. For Finlay, the ancient economy was driven by status and civic ideology rather than rational economic motivations. In emphasizing status and the consumer city, Finlay followed Max Weber rather than Karl Polanyi. Yeah, how is the battlefield today? In the 90s, Finlay was the primitivist and the object of criticism, although he could no longer defend himself. Some scholars tried to avoid direct attack and looked for alternative approaches to the ancient economy. For a while, and this is reflected in the Cambridge Economic History of the Greco-Roman World of 2007, the question of economic growth was somewhat central in Greek-Roman economic history. And I think one sees that this is the influence of questions of the present, which is always the case in historical work. You always are influenced by questions of your um, present. Sorry. Or there is this new institutional economics equally appealed to several of my colleagues. And I don't think that there is really a solution to the debate on methodology. I think it's necessary. It's not primitive modernism, but it's the methodology you can apply to answer questions about the ancient economy. And and also I think that the preference for certain theories depends very much on the personality of the researcher. So I don't think that we can overcome this. Now to international trade, and I realized that my first slide I forgot the question marks or the quotation, sorry, the quotation marks. And the quotation marks in the original title by Alessandro really indicates the problem already, what I would have with international trade. Nations did not exist during the time I'm talking about. The international trade as one between nations is problematic. And I shall rather talk about external exchange or long distance trade or foreign trade. For me, as a substantivist, not all exchanges of goods are trade. And I also must admit that I do not always manage to be very precise distinguishing exchange trade, but at least I try. I give you a working definition of trade that I could work with. Trade is a peaceful method of acquiring goods not available locally. It differs from hunting, robbery, plundering, and collecting tribute in that it displays a two-sidedness of movement. The goods in one group being exchanged for those of the other group. So you realize I try to avoid the market or the production trade. I would like to proceed, as you have seen in the content table of content, by looking at conditions and institutions in the ancient Greek world that supposedly triggered exchange and trade. So I think it's always demand and not production, but we will see. With the seminal work of Peregrine Horton and Nicholas Purcell on the corrupting sea, the physical environment of the Mediterranean Sea moved into focus of research in ancient history. In the wake of Fernand Braudel, or Fernand Braudel's book on the Mediterranean geographical time, so the Géohistoire, which is the first level of time he distinguished, becomes the center of analysis. This level of Géohistoire is that of the environment, with its slow, almost imperceptible changes, its repetitions and cycles. Baudel's second level of time, the longue durée, comprises long-term social, economic, and cultural history, where the Mediterranean economy, social groupings, empires, and civilizations change much more rapid than the environment. The third level of time is that of events. The natural conditions in the Mediterranean Sea promote seaborne connectivity. Horton and Purcell understand by connectivity the various ways in which microregions cohere, both internally, also with one another, in aggregates that may range in size from small clusters to something approaching the entire Mediterranean. What are the elements in the natural environment that gave rise to systems of exchange over distance? You see the Mediterranean Sea. It is the world's largest inland sea, about 3,800 kilometers long. The geography of the Mediterranean favored maritime exchange. You see that the coasts and islands are normally very close and normally visible from the sea and full of natural harbors. So there are very few spots where you, in fact, can't see, and they usually um, sailed along the coast anyway. Mm, the natural harbors, you have two examples. The Piraeus in Athens, you see very, yeah, it's a promontory surrounded by natural harbors. Or Knidos on the minor Asian coast, which has two harbors and is behind a anvil-shaped promontory. So, of course, these are very good conditions. The other favorite conditions, this is the only Greek I had. Okay, doesn't matter. Promontory or cape. Which these promontories jutting out into the sea, it made it easier to see certain landmarks from the sea. So when you are sailing, you need to orient yourself on the coast. But these landmarks posed great dangers at the same time for the sailing ship in the form of underwater rifts, adverse currents, and unpredictable winds. So it is really dangerous to sail around these promontories. Traveling by sea was dangerous. The sheer number of shipwrecks discovered to date bears witness of this fact. But at the same time, trading by ship offered the possibility of a windfall profit. For the moment, I concentrate on the corner of the Mediterranean Sea, the Aegean, but more or less it applies almost to the entire Mediterranean. The surrounding land is characterized by great contrasts, often within short distances. The degree of ecological variation can be so large that the climate south of a mountain can be entirely different from the climate north of a mountain. These local microregions produce a rich biodiversity of flora and fauna. And also, if there's a crop failure in one region, there is bound to be a region just around the corner where an abundant harvest can be found. The exchange is necessary and connects microregions by force. Not only has the outcome of agricultural production been uneven, natural resources also have been unequally distributed. The search for metals, in particular, has drawn people into trading ventures. I would have liked to present you with a map of mineral deposits of the whole Mediterranean. I found a remark by William Harris, who complained some years ago that there is a lack of suitable maps, and still apparently there is no good map for the mineral deposits in the Mediterranean. I found this of one small corner. But here you can, if you really want to go into it, you see that there was tin, silver, lead, iron, copper, gold, and salt, for example, which the people were looking for. And there's a very complicated map about trading connections and trading routes in the Mediterranean. There were Greeks sailing, there were Phoenicians sailing, there were some Etruscans around. And I think there's too much crammed into this map anyway to get a good idea. Mm. So in addition to the different distribution of agricultural and mineral products between micro-regions in the Mediterranean, social institutions can stimulate the movement of goods. I would like to mention only a few and shall not treat them here all. So I go into guest friendship, which results in gift exchange. Urbanization creates local markets, attracting farmers of gardening products from the surrounding areas, or in case of larger agglomerations, such as Rome, staple foods from afar. Or another institution, the Port of Trade, a model developed by Karl Polanyi, is an institution that secures exchange between partners of different economic systems. Examples that do not qualify it as trade because they do not involve a two-sided exchange, but nevertheless result in the movement of goods include domination that leads to tributes, and robbery, plunder, piracy, causing a movement of goods without return. Marshall Sahlins called this type negative reciprocity. In the following, I shall concentrate on guest friendship, surplus trading, port of trade. Our earliest literary sources, the Homeric epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, are full of examples of guest friendship. This social institution secured support and safety in situations like traveling, warfare, and emergencies. In the context of guest friendship, members of the elite exchanged valuable prestige goods to strengthen their personal relationship. These social relations of guest friendship could be inherited from father or grandfather. Here is a diagram that shows gift giving in certain context or social situations. It's a highly complex social institution, and all objects could move over quite long distances by any of these exchange scenarios. But I think that the social relationship of guest friendship can be considered to have triggered long distance trade. Ever since Marcel Mauss wrote his essay Sur le don in 1923-24, the discussion about gift giving and reciprocity has never stopped. His essay Sur le don is the first systematic and comparative study of gift giving and the first interpretation of its social function. The essay Sur le don was not only pioneering in its ethnographic approach, but it was also part of an organized attack on contemporary political theory against utilitarianism. In his moral conclusions, Mauss tells us quite pointedly how much we have lost by replacing a perfectly rational economic system as what he considered the gift giving, in which the exchange of goods was not mechanical but a moral transaction, which created and maintained human personal relations between individuals and groups. Ever since, Mauss has been the place of refuge for those seeking an alternative to modern market trade. Mauss' idea of the gift was original. It runs against our established idea of gifts, which is something given freely without the expectation of return. In Mauss' argument, each gift is part of a system of reciprocity in which the honor of both giver and recipient are engaged. He says exchanges and contracts take place in the form of presents. In theory, these are voluntary. In reality, they are given and reciprocated obligatorily. So there are three obligations: to give, to receive, and to reciprocate. There has recently been quite a lot of discussion, whether gift exchange and market exchange do not have much in common. For example, David Graeber, in his discussion on debt and obligation, he brings it rather close. In turning gift giving into a subform of reciprocity, where in reciprocity there's almost an economic meaning inherent. So if you bring it together, then you can easily reduce gift giving to a means of economic exchange. In these discussions, both ideas have been blurred. So the gift exchange and the market exchange blurred into something not very meaningful anymore, I think. And so I I argue that one should keep it apart. As More's intention was not to explain rationalist economic behavior. On the contrary, he wanted to free gift giving from any connection with rationalist economic behavior. From a Polanyian point of view, the difference must be emphasized. Gift exchange is socially embedded, whereas market change is not. Without combining trade with market, I believe that guest friendship is a social institution that triggered long distance trade. Personal relationships proved helpful in facilitating trade. Ritualized guest friendships and the institution of the proxenos in ancient Greek cities both formed human networks to secure trade and regulate the process of exchange and distribution. So the proxenos is a citizen of a state appointed by another state to host its ambassadors and represent and protect its interests there. So a very diplomatic institution. I come to the surplus trading. So when I'm talking about surplus here, I would like to apologize to Professor Cesarato for any possible misunderstandings. It is the normal surplus that Professor Cesarato defines as the surplus that populations generally set aside as insurance for scarcity years. It is simply part of the agricultural production unnecessary for survival. Professor Cesarato has, in the same article I was quoting from, of 2023, he quoted Gordon Child, in that he suggested that normal surpluses may provide an occasion for foreign trade. The surplus thus gathered will help tide the community over bad season. It will form a reserve against droughts and crop failure. Ultimately, it may constitute a basis for rudimentary trade and so pave the way into a second revolution. Okay, I don't see the foreign trade surplus, but I am going to talk about evidence about the normal surplus and a bit of trading. So all this made me think of one of my favorite ancient authors, Hesiod. However, before coming to his advice, Hesiod's, so the ancient author Hesiod's advice on surplus trading, I would like to put the discussion into a research or into the research context. So I need to return to the primitivist idea of the closed household economy and the independence of the household in ancient Greece. Karl Bücher's concept of the closed household economy has received several attacks as it represents the counter image of a modernist view of a profit oriented ancient market economy. The concept of a closed household economy emphasizes agricultural production with the aim of subsistence and self sufficiency. The opposite of subsistence economy, however, is not necessarily the market economy. I come back to the book on the corrupting sea, where Peregrine Horden and Nicholas Purcell argue against three stereotypes which have been expressed in the context of a peasant society. So the three stereotypes are autarky by subsistence, self-determination and social independence, and immemorial stability. Their arguments against these stereotypes are: autarky by pure subsistence would all too easily result in ruining the household. Surplus is necessary against famine. Provision for times of shortage essential. The rocky topography And I explained this south and north of a mountain and the different ecological microregions. So this rocky topography led to exchange as the kind of crops and the resulting harvests varied over short distances. There was mobility between regions of abundance and areas of scarcity. From an ecological perspective, no individual or community can live in isolation from the world around it. So this is what they argue against self-determination, social independence. And there is no such thing as ancestral stability, because contact with others inevitably triggers transformation. This is, for example, described in the notion of peer polity interaction, which is a concept to explain the spreading of innovations. The Boeotian poet Hesiod, for a long time considered the promoter of self-sufficiency and independence of the Greek farmer, was prepared to concede a moderately prosperous peasant farmer might load the surplus of his grain crop produced by himself and his small workforce into his own modest boat and dispose of it down the nearby coast, either before the grain harvest starts, which is late April, May, or during the dead season of the agricultural year immediately after the grain harvest. Mm, so I quote a prose translation by Glenn Most. I leave out the first passage, which is the advice to keep the boat safe in winter. And then at the right time of the year, according to Hesiod's advice, the farmer could dispose his surplus by boat. You yourself wait until the sailing season arrives, and then drag your swift boat down to the sea. Arrange the cargo in it and get it ready so that you can bring the profit home. Profit in Greek is kerdos, so it's gain, advantage, benefit. Now he tells us the story of his father and how he came to the village Hesiod lives in, or lived in. Just as my father and yours, Perseus, the brother, you great fool, used to sail in boats, deprived as he was of a fine means of life. Once he came here too, after he had crossed over a big sea, leaving behind Aeolian Kyme, this is on the Minor Asian coast, in a black boat, fleeing not wealth, nor riches, nor prosperity, but evil poverty, which Zeus gives to men. And he settled near Helicon, a wretched village, Askra, evil in winter, distressful in summer, not ever fine. So this Askra is close to Delphi, west of the Boeotian Thebes. Once again, Hesiod emphasizes the importance of good timing in all work to be done, but especially in going to sea. As for you, Perseus, be mindful of all kinds of work in good season, but above all regarding seafaring. Raise a small boat, but place your load in a bigger one, for the cargo will be bigger and your profit will be bigger. Profit on profit, if the winds hold back their evil blasts. Hesiod also reminds his brother of the nautical dangers at sea. Even if Hesiod accepts the possibility to trade surplus for profit, it should be done at the right time of the year. His advice did not have a full-time trader in mind. Agriculture remains the basis for human existence. However, in this world of the independent farmer, exchange outside one's own household and village was clearly accepted. So it was not that primitive as some people thought. So neither the primitivist idea of a closed household economy nor um, by the um, I can't explain this here in more closely the complete independence of the household in ancient Greece, which was also taken out as an interpretation of Hesiod mainly. So both do not really apply anymore, not even in the words of his supposed advocate, one can see here. So I come to my last point, port of trade. Greek migration used to be to be called Greek colonization, but this term is now avoided. Colonization is always more associated with the 19th century. This map gives an idea which areas of the Mediterranean and the Black Sea area were settled by Greeks, Phoenicians, and Etruscans. The main reason for migration was not trading activities, but settlement for agricultural production abroad. This one can see from the places where the Greeks went to, and even the Phoenicians, when they came to Carthage, they founded a city, or in southern Spain, they were looking for minerals, so silver, basically. Mm, uh, Certain areas, however, such as the Levantine and Egyptian coasts, were not settled by Greeks, uh, who nevertheless explored these areas as traders or mercenaries. The example of a port of trade I studied many years ago belong into this context. So you see Naucratis in the Nile Delta. I hope you find it. Without extensively talking about this migration, I wish to point out that, of course, with this migration, Greeks and Phoenicians and Etruscans became more familiar with the Mediterranean, that again facilitated long distance trade. For the purpose of this paper, I would like to limit myself to the Polanian model and the surprises of ongoing research. First, it seems important to characterize Polanyi's port of trade model as belonging to the type Max Weber called ideal types. Max Weber defined his ideal types as a conceptual abstraction attained by reducing the wealth of empirical data to its supposed core components. This is done by singling out and accentuating those features one deems to be central or basic to the institution in question. Of course, it also means suppressing, that is, granting less significance to those features that are considered marginal to the ideal type. Therefore, an ideal type does not exist in reality. One cannot find it in the real world. The ideal type helps to identify and compare similar instances and to find questions. When working with ideal types, these change more as more empiric, or they can change when you work with with the ideal types. They change with the empirical data added to this type. I took Polanyi's model, and by working with the material from Naucratis, I singled out and accentuated these features on the list. It would be too long probably to explain all. The most well, at least I could see these in the literary the evidence and in the archaeological evidence. And what I want to point out here is that a port of trade is a most singular place. So if then the guest country, so to speak, gives a port of trade to another community of trader, to another people, then normally it's a very special place. In the Japanese, when they gave Dishima to the Dutch, it was something special. They could only be there. So only a short quote from the literary evidence. What I found in Herodotus, I leave out the other paragraph before. Herodotus says, in old days, Naucratis was the only emporion, and I can't go into emporion now. I can explain it later in the discussion. And there was no other in Egypt. Anyone who brought a ship around any of the other mouths of the Nile was bound to state an oath that he did so of necessity and then proceed to the canopic mouth, should contrary winds prevent him from doing so. So if he couldn't go via the Mediterranean, he had to go around the delta. He had to carry his freight to Naucratis in barges all around the delta. And then Herodotus says, in such honor, Naucratis was held. Here you see the place of Naucratis and on the Canobic branch of the Nile, and you have the delta. And to get an impression, a very fancy image from an exhibition catalog of 2016 in the British Museum. The temples, the larger areas, not the small houses, they were not excavated, but parts of the temple were. And here in the forefront, you see Greek temples, and the white bit is the Hellenion, and in the background, you see the Egyptian temple, so which was excavated too. Only 1 year after I published my book on Naucratis, another place in the Nile Delta was discovered, lying on the same branch as Naucratis, the Canobic branch, where Greeks left their traces. So now we have a second place, Tunis Heraklion, where there were not enough there was enough Greek material discovered to say, okay, the Greeks were there too, not only Egyptians, but Greeks. And I have another fanciful reconstruction. So you see definitely an Egyptian temple almost in the middle of the field, and to the right you see a very tiny sort of Greek temple. Yeah, to have to deal with these two places of Greek presence in the Delta on the same branch, had to change somehow my picture of Naucratis, because now not all the features I set up or got as a or made to my points for saying yes, okay, Naucratis corresponded to this ideal type of a port of trade. Now the singularity is lost. So perhaps one can say, okay, the Greeks arrived, and then they perhaps had to change boats. This is not quite certain. Perhaps the boats could sail up to Naucratis, or they had to go onto different boats. And one can say this probably the Greeks had an entry port into the Nile Delta, and then they continued to Naucratis. Of course, there's a question what they did find at Naucratis. Perhaps they were close to natron resources, the west of the Nile Delta. Probably one could find natron. So at least now for me, this problem has arisen, whether I can still say it's a port of trade or not. Yes, I think this was my last part, and I thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Yeah.
So thank you, Professor Möller. And I think we could have a break, like a 10 or 15 minutes. What do you think? 15 minutes. 10 minutes. Let's do 10 minutes. Okay.